Can you turn on my light right over here?
Yeah.
Yep. For the folks who could not join us today, so this meeting is being recorded. All right, let's get the ball rolling. I would love to introduce Dr. Marie Henselder, Marie Henselder Kimmel. She's a retired obstetrician gynecologist from Cherry Hill. Gridlock and healthcare policy inspired her to co-found the first New Jersey chapter of American Promise in 2017. And she is now the volunteer New Jersey state coordinator of American Promise. So Marie, thank you so much for joining us. We're very, very happy to have you, and we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to hop on with our supporters and really help us understand American Promise and what you guys are fighting for. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks so much for inviting me. And I wasn't aware I was the first guest speaker, but I hope I'm the first of many democracy reform champions, and I believe that that's probably the case, given the what I know about the Forward Party so far. So I would like to go ahead and share my screen. Let me get this out of the way. And we're going to look at slideshow. Good. And I see some familiar names and faces in the participants. So welcome and good morning. What better than a rainy morning to learn about saving our democracy? So American Promise is a cross-partisan nonprofit organization formed to empower citizen advocacy action in all 50 states to restore the power of we the people to self-govern by limiting big money in politics, by passing the 4R Freedom Amendment. Just like I believe many of you, why you would be here with the Forward Party meeting and why my volunteers join me is that we're disgusted with what's going on in our democracy, and we believe big reforms need to be made in order for us to find the promise, the American promise of what our democratic republic was supposed to be about. Sorry. There we go. So
sorry, Marie, if I could pause for a second.
Sure.
Can you guys raise your hand if you're seeing her presentation? Okay, so everyone's seeing what I'm seeing. Marie, could you try to refresh your screen, just because I'm getting that same black loading box that you were getting before when I was trying to share.
Interesting.
Yeah. There we go.
It's working here, but not when I go to slideshow.
Yeah, try to click slideshow again.
Let me try this again.
And if we have any Google presentation experts on the line, yeah, loading. Oh, wait, nope. No, yeah, we're gonna have to do it.
It's still okay. I'll just view, take away the speaker's notes. I want to maximize the size of the
I don't know what this is.
Yeah, this looks good.
Is this okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So regardless of how we identify politically, there are core American values that we share. We believe that all Americans are equal citizens entitled to equal representation in our government. And we believe in human liberty and strive to create a system of effective self-governance. The people's will should be represented in our government. But our political system is under stress. Our constitutional democratic republic is in urgent need of repair and renewal. So this political cartoon, I think, sort of says it all. The American democratic process, that little group of people there at the bottom are participating in the great American democratic process, but we're swamped by a tsunami of unlimited special interest cash. We're in this situation after Supreme Court decisions made it their policy that money is equivalent to speech. Since under the First Amendment, speech can't be restricted, money, therefore, can't be restricted. That theory failed to account for the quote unquote free speech of everyday people that's drowned out by this staggering flood of money. So a very small, wealthy segment of the population has gotten gigantic power over our political system. This is a slide from the American National Election Survey of the Pew Research Center. They do it every 4 years. I'm sorry, this for some reason on my screen, this little black squiggly line, it really should overlay that. The slide came out with the same colors. But as you can see here, the question is the government run to benefit the majority of us, which is what this line started out saying, or is it run for the benefit of a few big special interests? And that's where this started. And in the 1960s, the majority of people believed that government was run for the good of all of us. But what happened in around 1970, Watergate, Vietnam War, and clearly people began thinking, it's not really for the benefit of all of us, it's the benefit of a few big special interests. And now in 2020, the figure is that 90% surveyed believe that the government is run for the benefit of a few big special interests, and about 10% believe that it's run for the good of all of us. That's a tremendous loss in trust in the government. And representative of who? In an ideal democratic republic, this slight gray line would mean that the more support there is among the majority of people, the better the chances are of legislation being passed in Washington. That would be ideal. We know where our system is clearly far from ideal. In fact, when the 90%, the majority of Americans support something, whether they hardly support it at all, don't, or whether they have 100% support for it, there's basically a 30% chance of that legislation being passed, no matter what the American majority feel. But the elites, the 10% that do these donations, their support is much more in line with what you would hope for in a representative democracy. And this is a study actually from two social scientists, Gillens and Page, and it was in 2014. One of the two universities was Princeton, looking at this. Sorry, my voice is a little bit scratchy. So American Promise believes that a constitutional amendment is the core way to fix these problems. So our purpose is that it will restore the rights of Americans to regulate election money, to protect our free speech, our representation, our communities, and our states from systemic corruption. Ooh, what happened?
Hold on a second. Marie, go ahead and try to hit share screen again so that we can take over. Yeah.
There we go. We're back. So where does this money come from? If the pie chart on the left is the total population of the United States, most of the money donated in campaigns is from less than about 1% of the population. And this is actually large donors and small donors. On the right-hand side, we look at money from individual donors, and the green is the people who donate less than $200, the small donors. And the blue is those who donate more than $200. And these numbers held true pretty much going back to 2010. About 70% of the money comes from individual donors who donate more than $200. And of course, then there's the breakdown of more than 2,000, more than 10,000, more than 100,000, more than 1 million. And those numbers are ever smaller, slim numbers of our population that donate those amounts of money. As Americans have seen this flood of money into our politics, actually, the general populace has donated in more, more of us have donated. Back in 2010, the small donors, before the Citizens United Supreme Court decision came through, the small donors actually donated more money than the 100 biggest donors, and by many fold, actually. But that rapidly started to change. And of course, these are the midterm elections. And the reason for that is looking at this most recent midterm. This is the money of the 100 biggest donors here in the light blue, and then in the dark blue, that's all of the small donors in the whole United States that donated less than $200. This number in 2022, the small donors donating less than $200 was a record $747 million. But the 100 largest donors donated 60% more than that, over 800 million. It's pretty staggering. Here's numbers looking at the presidential elections. And again, how the election spending has just been crushing records. 2008, maybe about 5 billion total on Congress and presidential. Green is the presidential. 2012, that grew a little bit. 2016, we hit a record. It was $6.3 billion. And the predictions for 2020 spending was, oh my gosh, we're going to hit a record. We're going to well progress past $7 billion. Well, yeah, we did. We hit actually the total $16.3 billion of spending. And that spending includes donations to candidates and spending by candidates, as well as the outside spending, the spending directly by entities on their commercials online, their commercials on TV, their mailers, direct mailers, and other activities, other political activities. Part of the, I'm not going to go into this a lot because we don't have a lot of time right now, but the question comes up, I'll answer it more. So the two figures that you hear about is the big money spending and the dark money spending. And what does that mean? So there's totals of money spent in campaigns. And then, as you are probably aware, we have disclosure laws. We have rules by the FEC of who has to say, well, I'm the one who donated that money. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court decisions that have come through have said, well, knowing who that money comes from really doesn't corrupt the system. So we don't really have to have disclosure on large amounts of this money, excuse me. So the dark money is the money it's not spent by the candidate, and the people who do spend it don't identify, hi, I'm really the fossil fuel lobby. I'm the one who's spending to say, oh, we shouldn't regulate natural gas, or, because that just happens to be a commercial, a dark money commercial that's on a lot lately. So you can see here that that this money is really skyrocketing as well. From 2010 to 2018, the total of the undisclosed dark money was approximately $1 billion total. But in 2020 alone, there was $1 billion of dark spending. And that's really troublesome in a democracy. We don't know who's trying to push a particular viewpoint or why they're trying to change the conversation. The other problem is that money can come in from outside of a district when we're talking about a congressional race or a local state race. It can come in from outside of the state. And because these disclosures don't have to be made, we know that some of this money is coming in from outside of the nation. It's really foreign money, although that's supposed to be illegal. This shows in 2020 some of the top Senate races, and the yellow is the outside money that went into the race compared to the rust color that was the money spent by the candidate themselves. And it makes sense. So most of these races, North Carolina, Maine, Georgia, this is actually Georgia Ossoff in the middle, and then Georgia Warnock is over here too, to the right of that. Michigan, that those were swing states for the 2020 election. So it makes sense why there was so much money going in there, because the balance of power in the Senate was so critical. In addition, there's a problem because anyone who's been interested in electoral politics or actually running for office, is the bar to be able to even compete and as a new candidate is rising. Back in 2008, the average cost to win a seat in the House was about $1.3 million that the candidate would have to raise. By 2020, that average is $2.3 million. And in the Senate, $8.5 million back in 2008. And by 2020, the average was $27.1 million for a winning Senate race. The average loser for the Senate in 2020 spent $24 million. So the people who can have the whether they have the personal wealth or they have the connections to raise that money, are not the everyday people who are most familiar with the needs and opinions of the majority of the people. So you have a skew of the people that are representing us in Washington, not really representing the wealth classes, the level of wealth that most of the American people actually have. So how do we get here? Well, basically, there have been 40 years of court decisions that have gotten us into this situation where, as the gentleman that's has 1% on his suit says, thanks again to the Supreme Court, my free speech is worth more than yours, by their campaign contributions being a huge megaphone, blowing the 99% of us out of the field. I'm sorry, let me just make sure I'm making my notes here.
And while Marie's doing that, like that is insane. When you think about the fact that we live in a democracy, and the democracy is all based about, us representation being a direct relation to its citizens and its voters, it's pretty crazy to think that simply because someone has more resources, their voice counts more. Right. It's almost like voting back in the day where like you could only vote if you own land. Right.
Correct. Correct.
And this is like an evolved, more modern version of that.
Yeah.
It's completely,
and
it's laughable.
the wording in the opinion, the majority opinion, basically argued that, yeah, government has a role in preventing corruption, but a bare majority of the justices in that opinion held that independent political spending by special interests, by lobby groups, by unnamed, undisclosed money did not represent a substantive threat of corruption, provided that it wasn't directly coordinated with a candidate's campaign, which is the ruling that basically opened the door to super PACs. And if you've done any reading about campaign finance, you know that not only do they, maybe they don't act, there aren't emails that say, okay, the candidate says, okay, we'll do this. And the super PAC says yes, but the literally people running the super PACs and people running the campaign can often be the same person, or they're using the very same PR firm to do both. So it's baloney. They're coordinating essentially. It's a mockery. And of course our FEC, up until very recently, didn't have a majority, so they didn't even have a quorum to decide that some of these things needed to be looked into. So that's a whole other problem. The FEC is a mess too. So Citizens United decision is probably the most well-known of these series of decisions, and that's the one that came down in 2010 and sort of changed that whole trajectory of the spending and the arms race, the money arms race. So back to the For Our Freedom Amendment. We looked at these problems. People don't feel like they're being heard by government, and it seems like we don't have very much effect or influence on the legislation that gets passed and the policy that's followed. We're not being represented, and the moderate income candidates that would better represent the life experience of the majority face huge money obstacles to get into the fight. And therefore, our elections have been turned into money battlegrounds of national interest rather than the interests of a particular state or locality, and even foreign actors that can come in and affect the messaging and the grounds on which the campaign is fought. So why do we need an amendment? No standalone reform is going to correct a Supreme Court ruling. The Supreme Court could overrule that ruling, but the ideologic bent of the current Supreme Court is it's likely to take decades if we were able to get the balance of the Supreme Court back around. So essentially, we need to fix, quote unquote, the Constitution, which is what a U.S. constitutional amendment does for us. And in fact, 27 of the 27 amendments that we currently have, 8 of them corrected prior Supreme Court rulings. there's unity and consensus on this. Very few, in fact, basically no Supreme Court amendment, constitutional amendments have started off with the amount of support. 75% of Americans across the political spectrum support an amendment to fix this problem with our campaign finance situation. Federalism, each state can decide what is best for itself. There were 24 state laws regulating campaign finance, saying that corporations couldn't donate, that there were limits on amounts of donations. 24 state laws were overturned when this Supreme Court made this decision, changing the rulings of on the constitutionality. And civic trust, we need to reconnect Americans to our government and our citizenship responsibilities. So this is just a breakdown of the numbers. There have been many polls that have done over the course of the years since the Citizens United decision was handed down. 75% of Americans, 70% of independents, 85% of Democrats, and 65% of Republicans support this. And we know that to pass an amendment, 2/3 of congressional members have to vote for the amendment. So we have to have cross-partisan support, which would be a total of 67 senators and 290 House reps, and then would have to send it back to the states, and 38 states would need to support and ratify this in order to pass the constitutional amendment. So American Promise is working on not only educating citizens, but we do work to in communities to pass local resolutions, to get whether there be a ballot initiative available in this particular state, to pass a ballot initiative saying we call on Congress to pass this, or to have a non-binding resolution passed in the state to, again, call on Congress. And there have been 22 states that have done that. Believe it or not, I didn't know this until I started getting involved in this fight. New Jersey passed a non-binding resolution back in 2012, calling on Congress. And an interesting point of New Jersey history is that the primary sponsor of the resolution in the state Senate was Jeff Van Drew. As a state senator, Democrat, he was the primary sponsor. When he ran for Congress as a Democrat in 2018, he signed our candidate pledge, saying that he would support an amendment and fight for an amendment if he was elected. He co-sponsored the amendment, the most popular amendment resolution, as a Democratic House member. And of course, he flipped to Republican and in that same Congress. And then in this past Congress, he declined to sign our candidate pledge again for this, for this last, both for 2020 and 2022. And he declined to co-sponsor the amendment as well. So we have work to do across the aisle. Excuse me, let me just go to see what the next slide is here. Let me go back here. Let me just say a little bit more about that. The amendment resolution that's been most popular, there are several of them that have been entered. There's been one in every single Congress back to 2010, but the amendment resolution that's gotten the most support in the last two Congresses is called the Democracy for All Amendment. And the wording of it, what it would do is it gives Congress and the states the ability, it enables them to pass limits on the donation of money and the spending of money. And it also gives Congress and the states the ability to differentiate between natural human beings and legal entities like super PACs, lobbies, special interest groups, unions even. And, you know, depending on where you are in the political spectrum, you might feel like, well, I want that person, you know, I want that entity to be able to contribute, or I don't want that one to be able to contribute. But it allows Congress to make and the states to make those decisions. Those amendment resolutions have been primarily sponsored by Democrats, although there was one Republican co-sponsor in the last two Congresses, John Katko, who of course now is retired. He's from New York. And of course, Jeff Van Drew was a second Republican on in the last Congress, not in this one. And now American Promise has really said, well, we have support among Republicans in the, in the electorate. We need to get the support in the Congress. So we've come up with slightly different language that emphasizes sovereign. I'm going to just go to this for 1 second. That it talks about sovereignty, sovereign interests. It talks about federalism a little bit more. Political equality of natural persons is common to both amendment resolutions. It frames it a little bit differently, which is more palatable to the Republican mindset. And we are working nationally with a number of Republicans to introduce this amendment language in Congress, and then bring a number of Republicans on, and then work to make it more bipartisan and bring the Democrats on. Because unfortunately, we are faced with this tribalism of, well, if the Democrats, submitted it, we're not going to sign on to it, and that type of thing. And you're well familiar with that with your background from what's going on in our politics. So I'm going to conclude by saying, this is some information. You can sign our National Citizen Pledge, and then that way you can get the national newsletter information, and information about trainings and different activities that we're doing on a national basis. And then we also have this sign up for us here in American Promise, New Jersey. We're going to be participating in, in district and virtual lobby meetings with the new Congress in the spring. And we want to expand our reach and get into more of the congressional districts offices, obviously, and build support among our congressional delegation. We have had 9 out of our 12 and 11 out of 12 and 9 out of 12 of our delegates, our Congress people, signing on to the amendment resolution, and both of our senators in the last 2 Congresses. So we've had pretty good support, but of course we can always use more. So I'll wrap up there, let anybody has questions, and thanks so much for giving me an opportunity to share with you what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Marie. That was awesome. That was awesome, awesome, awesome. So, and it's no secret. I think a lot of the folks that are on this call, if you've been following the movement, right, you're probably already an activist or have been somewhat aware of a lot of the misfortunes of our state. And the fact of the matter is that money plays a role much more than we realize. Marie touched very much on the power of PACs, super PACs, of industries hiding behind, lobbyists, basically having one message out to the public, but really the real intentions are hidden through, dark money. But it goes even further than that, right? Because it's not just the corporations and in America and businesses and industries, but it's also the way that our legislators are fit into that funnel. Because the other thing that you see is the reason that, especially here in New Jersey, that it is such powerful machine control is because a lot of these legislators are, unfortunately, regardless of their perspective, are falling in line with the party bosses, because the party bosses also control how much money they're going to get, right? And for some of them, it's just a simple power hunger situation. For others, right, they genuinely believe that better me than someone else. So let me give in here so that I can at least do like the good stuff that I believe in, but I'll just kind of fold on these points so that I can stay here because I think I'll do a better job than someone else will. And that's a real thought with a lot of these legislators. This is extremely important. Campaign finance reform has to happen. Otherwise, it is going to be the current structure as it is going to continue to be one of the variable factors, because it's not just campaign finance reform, folks, as we all know, right? But it's one of the factors that's going to continue to force us to live in what I like to call a faux democracy, right? Because in a democracy where my vote counts, but not really, that's not a democracy, right? Herb, yes, please.
Hey, Brian, thanks for organizing this again, of course. And Marie, thank you.
Hi, Herb, how are you?
Good. Our paths have crossed a few times in the past.
Yes.
And we need to keep this solidarity in this, we call it the movement. It's like the electoral reform movement. That's the way I like to think of it. But Marie, I had a question for you. You talked a lot about like the federal level, but here in New Jersey, we have a whole bunch of wheeling and dealing
Yes.
going on with money as well. And, there's a group called NJELEC, which is supposedly the enforcement agency, which seems to be in bed with the political parties. But I was just wondering how much, you have a lot of data and stuff on federal. Have you done much studying or at the state level, how this process is in the state?
I have done a little bit at the state level, because American Promise's focus is, obviously getting state lawmakers to support the federal constitutional amendment. I haven't done as much on the state level, but we did have 2 candidate forums that we ran this year. One was in the early spring. We had a Dem, a Green, a Libertarian, and a Republican, and we had Julia Sass-Rubin from Rutgers speak, and she did a nice presentation on some of the the strength of the leadership money in New Jersey, and how that really poisons the system. And obviously we know that that's tied in with the Democratic machine money as well. I do follow what Jeff Brindle said, like, of course, he's our ELEC commissioner. I do follow what he says, but it is interesting. You're right. He talks about the power of the parties. Well, no, that's not, we shouldn't be worried about the power of the parties in our campaign finance reforms that we do here in New Jersey. We need to get the people empowered.
Of course, I agree. And one way that he justifies that is saying that we have to strengthen the parties to protect them against dark money, which actually does make sense. But the party's power in New Jersey is used more against us, the people, than it is against any of the dark money interests out there. So,
and I know that, I know Steve Barrett is on here, and I know several other people are working on, at some point, we as New Jerseyans should have ballot initiatives. We should be able to make effects on our constitutional abilities as New Jerseyans, and we don't have that. And there are many other things, obviously, that it affects. But that there's a whole other. This is hours. Gosh, if you get into the details of it, there's hours of tutorials that we could do.
Right. No, I know there's a lot of data. And then once you even understand the process and the rules and regulations, then there's the actual data. The data is out there about what money has been flowing between these different entities, so to speak, and like Marie mentioned, there's a specific one, I believe it's called like the Legislative Leadership PAC, which a lot of money flows through, and there's actually unlimited contributions at certain times of the year. There's all different kinds of regulations and stuff, but when you really start to see in New Jersey, the money, a lot of the money is actually being funneled via campaign contributions from like developers and a lot of architects and engineers into the local and county level politicians' campaign funds. And then a lot of that stuff gets pooled and moved around, and a lot of it ends up in this legislative leadership PACs. And it gives those people a lot of power.
That whole shell game of, the money goes here and then it gets passed over there and then it gets funneled back there, and that happens nationally, and it certainly happens on a statewide basis. So the funny thing was back, let's see, I think it was 2019, maybe 2018, 2019, when Sweeney's race for the Senate was a huge, I think there was 17, if I'm not mistaken, the total spent was $17 million on his state Senate race when NJEA went up against him.
Right.
And were supporting a Republican candidate. And shortly thereafter, something came out in the wash that the utility, I want to say, I don't remember now which one of the utilities, they mistakenly made a donation to one of the disclosing entities that was in support of the Norcross machine and Sweeney instead of the super PAC. So it was exposed that, $50,000. Yeah, you just got some legislation to support you, and you handed back $50,000. Oops. So.
Yep. Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on that. And folks, I guess, who are on this call, it's the more you learn about it, It's tough to learn because it's very upsetting at times when you actually see it. But, you know,
I
the
just
more
want
we
to,
learn,
I'll
you
put in
know.
I'll put in the chat. There are two websites if you're interested in digging around a little bit. OpenSecrets.org is a really good, it's a nonpartisan nonprofit looking, they follow all of this money, you know, the dark money, different races, lobbying. They do nice reports on what's happening, you know, with campaign finance. And they have recently merged with a much more opaque website. And I'm using that because it's difficult to use. It's called followthemoney.org. And that's really looking at state finance, state campaign finance. And they're going to make that site much more user-friendly. That's really like a nerd website where I have difficulty on that website. You go on that website and it's easy to get lost. And part of the difficulty also on that website here in New Jersey, we have decent campaign finance laws. There are a number, you know, I work with volunteer leaders around this. Virginia has no campaign finance limits. Texas, no limits on spending and donating, and really no limits on who can do what with what money. So they're really behind the curtain. They have no idea what's going on. We can sort of track what goes on here in New Jersey, not easily, but sort of.
Right. Well, but it takes a lot of work.
Yes, it takes
It's
a lot
not,
of
it takes a lot of work. I mean, if we had to like, it would be a great like crowdsource project, you know, if we could like just divvy up the work, say, well, one person go look at this particular legislators.
Elec is not easy, is also not easy
Right.
to get the
No.
money out of Elec, but follow the money. They are going to be, and I don't promise you go on there now and can find what you would want, but they are going to be, we just had a webinar with the director last week, and they are going to be making their site much more user-friendly, much more like when you go into opensecrets.org, you can actually find information. You can, and it's presented in a way that you can understand.
Yeah, I believe ELEC, I think at the beginning of the year, what they told me something about the expenditures are also going to become searchable at some point. That they're finally going to have that database, the campaign expenditures, which actually is useful because I think that's where some of the wheeling and dealing, when they make a contribution to another campaign, I think this shows up in the expenditures, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
Yeah.
Brian, I can't see if anyone else's hand is up, but I have some other things I could share if you want.
Yeah, go for it. Guys, if you have a question, please go into the reactions button at the bottom of your bar and then just hit raise hand. You'll see it's a big button. It'll show a raised hand and it'll say the words raised hand next to it. If you have questions, please go ahead and do so. Otherwise, yeah, let's keep it free flowing, Herb.
Okay, well, Marie had mentioned Professor Julia Satz-Rubin a little bit earlier in a talk that she gives. I actually, on my Facebook page, right on I think it's under just my profile or something, right at the top, I have a link to that talk because it's a very powerful talk. And it's all about how basically the power structure of New Jersey is organized, the real power structure, you know, of the political bosses, basically. That's one thing. The other thing is that just share news. We have been working with Senator Andrew Zwicker, and just on this past week, he introduced Senate Bill. It looks like it's number 3369, which is going to enable ranked choice voting at municipal and school board levels in New Jersey for any towns that so choose. The method by choosing it could be either by citizens initiative at the local level or by government body action to put a question on the ballot to the entire town, whether or not they want to use ranked choice voting in municipal and school board elections. So that's good news. We've been working on that. Now we have a bill number. We're waiting for the assembly bill number. We should get that in a couple of days, early this week, hopefully. That's just what I had to share, Brian, related to our group here. And yeah.
No, I appreciate it. And I think at this point, most people on this call probably know that Herb is with Voter Choice New Jersey. an awesome organization, which I am also a part of, basically dedicated to pushing for ranked choice voting. It is nonpartisan, so please feel free to check them out. So Marie, I had a question for you as well. So especially here in New Jersey, so Soft Corruption is a book that I tend to bring up a lot in these meetings. It's an excellent book that basically allows you to look behind the curtains. Herbert alluded to the way that machines really work and that the way New Jersey politics really work. And this book is really, it'll give you a great insight. It's by a former state senator who has since passed. And he basically walks through literal examples. He doesn't just tell you what's wrong, he walks you through examples of it occurring, and it's a little disheartening and depressing. But it's great from an informational perspective. So Marie, from being the subject matter expert, what do you think are like maybe the top 3 things that we need to do here in New Jersey to reduce the power of money in the system?
Well, as I said, I'm really a little bit more focused on the national rather than the New Jersey. But from what my observations over the last couple of years is certainly what we've just been talking about, these leadership, the fact that these leadership PACs, these leadership funds, that they had this ability to have unlimited money come into them, and they can dole it out and basically control, to control their caucus by who they support and who they give money to. And also there was, most of you are, or if not all of you may be aware that there was a bill passed, and I believe Troy Singleton was one of the primary sponsors of it in the Senate. They passed a bill about disclosure of sources of money that was then subjected to lawsuit by a combination of the ACLU about the free speech, against the free speech aspect of the way Citizens United argued. And I believe it was the Americans Enterprise Institute, if I'm not mistaken. I know it was a right-wing money group, and unfortunately it was struck down. It was found to be unconstitutional here in New Jersey, but there are disclosure laws that have been passed in other states, and I believe that that's something that we really should work on, because you can hide many sins. You can hide behind, Americans for Apple Pie, and it could be the most sinister, destructive initiative to our democracy, but you don't know who put the money into it. You just see the commercial, you just see the ad, you just, the money goes into the super PACs or the PACs supporting various candidates. And unfortunately, the money coming into state races, even down to school board races, is becoming obscene, because there has been there's been this determination, and many of you maybe know some of this. A lot of this campaign finance, the loosening of the campaign finance laws, came from the conservative side and was pushed through the Supreme Court. And the weaponization of it through 2018 was pretty much to benefit the conservatives. In 2018, the Democrats caught up. 2020, the Democrats outspent on outside money and dark money by 2-to-1 nationally. And 2022, it looks like again, the liberals are going to outspend the conservatives. We don't know exactly by how much. It takes a while for all this stuff to come in. But the emphasis on changing the redistricting processes statewide on a state-by-state basis, working on getting legislatures, working on getting school boards, that money is just unfortunately poisoning everything. So I think we need as a state to look at how to get some control over it, how to regulate that, so that everyday people aren't iced out of the conversation and iced out of the electoral competition.
Awesome, thank you. We do have a question from Lou, who is out in Jersey City. Basically, and I don't know the answer to this, but Lou wants to know if this could be addressed at a city level first, then county, and then state. And if a city passed the law, could it be deemed unconstitutional by the state?
It can be. It doesn't have to be, but it can be.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the state would be able to, it's kind of like our issue right now with ranked choice voting. And why we're, fighting for just a trigger ordinance at this point. But could it be addressed at a city level? If anyone has any insights on that, please feel free to chime in. But I think it's, because maybe you could have it on like municipal races like mayoral or council races. In that case, I'm sure you could probably do something, but I think the minute that unless you do have a county-wide law, which I don't know how that would work, right? But I think if you're talking about statewide races, right, and then taking place and then obviously being ran by a municipality or by a county, not really sure. Does anyone have any insights on that?
I'm not sure about the answer to that either, but we do know that some of the alternatives, some of the other, the constitutional amendment isn't the end all be all. The constitutional amendment lays the foundation so that these limits can be decided upon and placed by the various, by Congress, by the states. And then other things may need to be done, whether, there are some cities that use freedom vouchers. In other words, it's a certain amount of money and you can indicate that amount of money, it's public money, but that it would go to a particular candidate, or public financing. There are various methods that are being used on municipal levels that can be done, but it's only voluntary. They can never mandate that the candidates participate.
Lou, do you have a follow-up question? I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask because, the reason I'm asking is, for example, look at cannabis laws. Cannabis is still illegal federally, yet legal in the state and in several states, right? Now, the federal government is not going to, start cracking down on all these states and raiding places, but they could, right? If they really wanted to, they could. So I just think and again, it may just be a lot of hot air and a waste of precious time, but if you took it from a ground up level, you could create noise, right? A lot of noise. Like, hey, wait, why would you running for, and I'm just going to use some, random town. Why would you, as the mayor of Newark or council member of Newark, be opposed to showing where your campaign finances came from? Maybe, just maybe, it's coming from foreign money because there's an industrial complex that they really, really want to build, Now, I'm not saying that industrial complex would be a bad thing for Newark or whatever. However, it does devalue the vote of citizens of the city of Newark, So that's why I raised that question. Is there a way to just, I always believe in, from the bottom up, because top down is you're just burning dollars, I think. If you try to do it that way, most of the time. I'm not saying what you're doing, Marie, is burning dollars, but what I'm saying is that to really facilitate change in New Jersey itself, maybe New Jersey is from a city up perspective. Hence, just like the Forward Party's approach to getting seats of Forward Party members, right? Think of all the money Joe Jorgensen wasted for a moment here, that if that would have been spent on a local level, that could have actually facilitated some change, where all it did was just get a lot of attention and did nothing.
No, I think
to very briefly answer that, in terms of the limits for particularly what we're working on, limits on the amounts of money donated and spent are unconstitutional. So it can't be passed at a local level and then go all the way up. And the way we address the local, and we haven't done it recently here in New Jersey, is but in states where we're trying to get non-binding resolutions or trying to get a ballot initiatives passed, is we get municipal or county-wide non-binding resolutions to get the support of those entities to say and to call upon the congressional members or the state, depending on what it
Right.
is we're working on, to say, we want this, we think this needs to happen. So
Right.
as they get more of the municipalities online, then they say, okay, I guess we better consider this. And
Right.
All right. Thanks, Lou. Let's go to Chris.
Thank you very much. I just had a question that maybe you can explain better, Marie. You're talking about the constitutional amendment and the different variations and versions of it that have been proposed
Mhm.
over the year. And from the discussion that we've just been having about like a voucher program or democracy dollars, or these different types of incentives that local municipalities have to sort of encourage the spending, to give some more of that power back to the people. Those two things would have to happen simultaneously. I'm not, like, if I'm understanding correctly, like the limits on the actual campaigns and or any sort of mechanism that has public financing of campaigns would have to happen at the same time, right? You can't limit all of the contributions and then use like a taxpayer funded system to then fund people's running for office. Is that accurate?
They can go completely separately, because you think about, in 2010, before Citizens United was passed, and some of the, there were, subsequent and prior Supreme Court decisions, there was less money in politics. And we somehow we had elections. We didn't have as many negative attack ads that bombarded us on the radio and online and on television, but we somehow got to hear candidates, and we did elections. So limiting, putting limitations on money would immediately reduce that. And allow the voice of the people to come through, because I think I thought Brian might mention this before, but it's calculated that between 40 and 70% of congressional members' time is spent fundraising. That's why, if you ever thought about it, the DNC and the RNC are only 2 blocks away from the Capitol, because they have to leave their congressional offices and go to the political place, because you can't be raising money from your congressional taxpayer funded office. You have to go to the RNC or the DNC to make those calls. So when you're making those calls, who are you going to call? You're calling the big money donors, right? There's more return on your investment time. You get more money, you get more bang for your buck for their time, and also for their, their reelection fundraising. So yeah, both things I think need to happen, but they can really happen at separate times. And the one other thing I wanted to mention real quickly is that when you think about times when there have been a number of constitutional amendments, the end of the Civil War, the end of the Gilded Age, and we're kind of there again, right? The Gilded Age. The time of the civil rights amendments and dropping the voting age down to 18 and so on. There was a lot of upheaval, there was a lot of unrest and a lot of dissatisfaction with our system. And I think we're there. So I think the things that, like getting ranked choice voting in, we haven't talked about open primaries today, but that's another thing I know a lot of people are interested in, getting an amendment for campaign finance reform like this. There are a few others. I mean, I'm not particularly, I don't feel one way or the other about term limits. I think it probably is a good idea. I haven't done a lot of studying of it. There are a number of things. And this is the time to really work on it, because people are unhappy. So it's easier to activate people and motivate people to speak up when they're unhappy.
Yeah, wholehearted.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's an excellent characterization of how things are. That's brilliant.
Well, thanks, Chris. Carolyn?
Yeah, so first I wanted to just thank Marie for leading us in this really eye-opening conversation. I've been a member of American Promise, I guess it's going on 2 years. And actually, one of the reasons I raised my hand was going back to when Louis was speaking and he was asking about local passing legislation at the local level. And I wanted to mention, like, and I guess Marie has said this, but I just wanted to reiterate, it's got to be a parallel process, because when the amendment gets passed, it's not if, but when, all it does is say that states and the federal government are allowed to limit big spending. It doesn't do anything to actually limit it. It just gives permission. So we do need to pass laws at the federal level, at the state level, I think at every level, to take advantage of this amendment once it gets passed. The only harm in, trying to pass them now is that they may get, brought up, like somebody may try to overturn them and they would go through the court system and eventually they would get overturned, because we don't have that amendment to protect any laws that might get passed now. So it's not necessarily wrong to try to do it bottom up, but you may fight a good battle and get, lose in the end. So it has to happen in parallel. You have to be, looking at it from the bottom up, but also from the top down. The other thing I wanted to say is, obviously, I got involved with American Promise, but only at a very surface level. I have worked with Marie to lobby our state officials a couple of times, I guess in 21 and in 22. And as a candidate myself, I signed the pledge saying that if I was fortunate enough to make my way to Congress, that I would support this amendment. But I guess my question to Marie, for those who are hearing about all of this for the first time, is there a call to action? Like, what can the people on this call that are also, are hearing about it for the first time, what can they do to get involved with American Promise? Are there meetings that you're holding anytime soon? Are there, other than learning more about American Promise and about the amendment, how can they take action? Because we're talking, the people on this call, there's 21 of us now, are very, very dedicated people that want to see reform. And this is obviously a very important piece of the puzzle, along with, ranked choice voting, open primaries, and everything else. But limiting big money in politics is so important. How can people help you to get this to move along more meaningfully?
Well, put your name on the email list. We're getting together our, sort of our strategy for the upcoming Congress. There definitely are going to be lobby meetings, and prior to the lobby meetings, we're certainly going to want to get some, letters to the editor and the media, op-ed pieces if anybody becomes that interested in talking about the topic and working on it that way. Blair put a question in the chat about, is it worth it to have to talk to local officials to support it and to put pressure up on the congressional members? Yes, it definitely is. This, 2023 is a state legislature election year. And we just did a campaign to get some candidate pledges done for this past year. We definitely would be worth it for us to really start working back on the legislature, even though we did pass a non-binding resolution back in 2012. Our timeline nationally, I really didn't talk about it, is we're really aiming to try to get a resolution to the point where it has enough support. And first of all, it has to have Democrats and Republicans. So that's why we're kind of working on getting the Republican introduction, but then get enough support so that hopefully we could get it voted out of Congress by 2024, 2025 and back to the states. So although, we locally have been working with some of the state legislatures, we need to keep it in their mind, because hopefully it's going to be coming back in front of them in terms of the state legislature not too long from now. And second of all, because they are the ones who are going to move along, probably to run for federal office at some point. And they're certainly going to be the ones to need to pass the state-based reforms. So that's where I would say, put your name on the email list and you'll hear from us, lobby meetings. And we're thinking about some, maybe doing some democracy is brewing kind of events in January, February to get more information out to localities.
All right, we're going to do one more question, and Ray has been patiently waiting. So Ray, we will turn it over to you.
Okay, so it's both an observation and a question. And it goes back to one of the slides that Maria showed there towards the end, or maybe in the middle. And it showed that just this past election, over $16 billion was spent, which that takes it out of the realm of just politics into the realm of a big business industry, right? We are
Right.
now talking about that's an industry that's up there that rivals automaking. So it's a
Yes.
huge industry. My question is, out of that 16 billion, was that simply on, say, advertising, print media, so forth? Or does that include like the salaries that went to the different people in the PAC and that type of thing?
The salaries to people I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last word you said, Ray.
Okay, so like the political action committees and the other people that are out there doing all of this stuff, does that include their salaries and
No,
their spending?
no, it's the spending. It would be the spending. It would be all of the candidate spending. So it would include the campaign salaries. But in terms of when you look at the PAC and the super PACs and the social welfare organizations that donate, those dollars wouldn't be for inside their structure. It would be the money that they send out into the political industrial complex. And you're right, it is a political industrial complex.
So then we could actually say that probably the total value of that industry is probably over $20 billion.
Oh, yeah, because remember, there's dark money in there. I mean, this is money that what happens is Open Secrets and the entities that try to follow this, because it doesn't have to be disclosed to the IRS or not to the IRS, to the FEC. What they actually do is go to the IRS, because some of the things do need to be disclosed on their IRS forms. So they dig it out that way. And then there is some money that just gets shuffled around enough that they never figure out. I mean, super PACs have to disclose their donors, but you can have a shadow corporation, a shell corporation donating to the super PAC. And then you have Shell Corporation 123 donating to Super PAC A, and you still don't know where the money came from because you don't know how the money got into Shell Corporation 123. So there's definitely more. That's a very good estimate, but it's definitely more than that. And I always like to go back when we're talking about the millions and billions. 1 million is 12 days. 1 billion is 31 years. Seconds. That is, every time I think about that, and we're talking about 16 billion just for the 2020 election. And actually, it's this election, they're saying this midterm, the midterm in 2018 was all, through the roof. It was at I think it was 6.3 billion. This one they think is going to be 8.9 billion. Just congressional races. And then when you add in the state races that happened, of course, we don't do that here in New Jersey, but the state races on top of that, they think the spending for this election in 2022 is around the 16 billion mark. And that's not even with a presidential. I mean, we can't even afford to keep going this way.
No, but then that brings up another point, right? So essentially what we're up against is not just a political structure, but a whole lot of people whose livelihoods depend on this. I worked it out real quick that the rate of inflation, basically the spending has outpaced the rate of inflation by about 40% this century, since 2000. That means there's a whole lot of people out there with a lot of power, unfortunately, whose livelihoods depend on this insanity continuing. So I'm wondering, what are the strategies for kind of trying to shoehorn them out of the way? Because obviously they're the ones standing in the way.
Well, there's a few longer range things that they're going to have to, on the national level, they're going to have to develop. But part of what's happening is that there are corporate people who they realize that there's this pay to play politics going on, and certain of them have certainly participated, but some of them want to say, like, wait a minute, me being pressured now by a politician to put money on the table for their election campaign fundraising is not what is right for me and the corporate world. So we have a business network, and there have been like Pirelli tires is in our business network. And I'm just off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of, there's some, actually Trillium Assets is a finance firm and so on. But basically looking at some of these big corporations to also say, this is crazy. We can't keep doing business this way. It doesn't add value to what we're trying to do in the marketplace. So we're trying to come at it that, on a national level, we're trying to fight it that way. And also, like I mentioned, although had been weaponized kind of by one side initially, it's really a money arms race now. So the fact that it's affecting both sides, the right and the left, I think is going to help us to get our voices through to say, look, we've got to cut this out because we can't keep giving all the power to the upper echelon. We need to get the power back to the rest of the population so we can make our government work for us, so we can maintain it as a system, as a representative government. I think we
Okay,
broke.
that basically takes care of what I had to say.
Excuse me?
He said that takes care of what he had to say.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Good. Guys, this was awesome. Marie, thank you so much for hopping on with us. This was so
Thanks
informative.
for having me.
I know I learned a ton, and I sincerely appreciate your time. Guys, if you haven't and you want to support Marie and American Promise, I dropped the link in the group, in the chat, americanpromise.net/join-us. I signed up because I'm definitely going to be supporting this organization. So please make sure to do so. We did want to go over a few forward things, but it's 11:11, and I know a lot of you were not planning to be here longer than an hour. So we'll send an email recap on some of the stuff. Nothing great, nothing major going on right now with the holidays approaching. We've got some events, but that's pretty much it. Marie, thanks again, guys. We have to make sure that we stay aware, we keep staying educated, we educate others, because all the messaging here is not the problem. The problem is awareness, and we have to make people aware of how these things work and what's actually going on if we want to bring a difference to the world. So please do so. Invite your friends, invite your families to these calls. All we want to do is educate. That's it. So thanks again, Marie. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your Saturday, and hope you have a rocking weekend. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.